Hello and welcome to everybody on Cloud Fitness. So in today's video of Python series, we are together going to create a new Python program which will be our second Python program in this particular tutorial. So whatever we have learned in our past videos, right? So we are going to do our implementation of whatever concepts we have learned in our previous video. So let's move ahead and open the PyCharm editor and let's start and create a new Python file. So I'll name my file as the second program, right? Because this is our second program and I'm kind of trying to maintain the whole files that we are learning in each video. So let me just hit on create. Now we will go ahead and see what exactly is the question. So if I look at the question, it is saying write a Python program that takes two inputs from user, right? So basically you have to write a program which is taking two inputs from a user, floating number f and integer number I, and apply the below formula on these numbers and display the output. So basically you have to take an input from the user and then you have to apply that formula on those numbers and you have to display the output, right? So this is the question. Now if you look here, essentially we have to take an input from the user. So when I say input from the user, so basically it has to take input from me. I have to write a program which has to actually take an input from me right now. So for that we have a function called as input function, right? So throughout this series you will actually see that you will learn a lot of different functions which you can utilize in your everyday projects, right? So this is called an input function which takes an input from the user. Right now, let's say what I need to type. I need to take an input, a floating point number and an integer number. So let's say I will ask my user to input a number. Please input an integer number, right? So this is what I will ask my user to provide me. So let's say I ask him to give me a number and I name it as I, right? Now similarly, I need to take another input from a user which is nothing but f, which is nothing but a floating number. Let's say a float number. I am taking two inputs from a user, I and f, right? So these are the two inputs that I'm taking using the input function, right? This is again an inbuilt function that comes with Python. And whatever integer a user will give me, I'm going to keep it as I, and whatever input our user is going to give me, I'll make it as f. So now let me simply run this file. So the moment I run this, right, you can see on the console over here, right, in the output window, you can actually see that it is saying please input an integer number. So let's say 78 and I click on enter. The moment I click on enter, it is asking me please input a float number. So let me input a float number 78.0, enter. Right? So this is how you can actually interact as well. And let me increase the size of my code, right? Okay, so basically if you see on the screen, you can actually press Shift Alt and the dot. So if you do that, you can actually increase the size of whatever characters you type over here. So we have done this input. Now my question also says that you have to apply some formula, f into I into 100 by 23. So let's say f into I into 23 by into 100 by 23. So this is the formula that I need to apply. So in Python, this symbol actually represents your multiplication, right? And now this is what we have to apply on the input that we get from the user, and that output is nothing but, let's say it is an output. I will name it as output. I will put it in output variable equal to this, right? And then what I can say, then I can simply print, I can print that the output of my let's say the output is, right, and then I can say comma and then I can say output, right? So this is a very small basic program, but it is going to give an error, right? So now let me simply run it. right? Now first it will ask me to input an integer number. Let's say I inputted 98. Then it will ask me to add a floating point number, let's say 5.8. Enter. Now you see that it gave an output. Now why did it give an error? So we have to understand it, because the same thing I explained you in my previous video, right? This type error, right? Why did this type error come in? So you pause this video and think about it. Why did this issue come up, right? So this type error is nothing but it is saying can't multiply sequence by non-int of type str. So it is talking about type str, right? It is saying that this f and I is nothing but a string, which is true. Why it is true? So let me comment this part. I will explain you all this. So let me say print type of I, right? And similarly let me say print type of f, right? And let me run this. So let me give them the input number, whatever my code is asking, and now you can see it is saying that the type of your I and f is str, and I cannot multiply a string with 100 and I cannot divide a string with 23, right? This is what we discussed, that this is basically you cannot divide a string by a number, right? So this is something that we discussed in our last video of typecasting, data type and variables. Right now here the catch is that whenever you use this input function, right, whatever user gives as an input, it always gets converted in string format by default. So by default this input will always be of string type. So to make it into an integer type, because you have to take it as an integer number, you have to use this int function, and you have to pass it over here. Similarly, you have to use float function over here. This float and int function also I described in my last video, and you have to put it like this over here. Now if I run it, right, let me add a number 89 and then let's say 5.4. Enter. Now you can see the class is integer, the class is float. So now it got converted into integer and float. Now if I uncomment this, now my I is an integer, f is a float. Can you multiply an integer with float? Yes, you can. Can you divide it with the number? Yes, you can. Now let me run it. I will tell you another concept over here. So let's say 45 and the second number, let's say 3.6, enter. Now you can see that it says the output is 704 point something something something, right? So by default it took output as a float. So by default the data type of output is float, right? This is done by Python, not by you. So this is called implicit typecasting, right? So we already discussed typecasting in our previous video, right? So this is basically called your implicit typecasting, right? Which is done automatically by the Python, right? But now if you want to make it as an integer, you can simply say int over here, right? You can simply put int function here. So what will happen is by default the input is a decimal type, float type. It will convert it into an integer and then give you the output. So let me run it. So if you see here, give me a number, let's say 245 and then another number 4.78, enter. Now you can see the output is 5091. So it is not having now floating point integer. Now this is called explicit typecasting. So I will say explicit typecasting and let me comment it over this. So basically I hope you understood why I kept this particular video. So we are learning concepts and we are implementing it as well. In this particular video we took input from the user, integer and a float number. We applied some formula on top of it. We learned that we have an input function. We learned that input function by default it gives a string value. If you want to convert it to integer, float, you can convert it using an integer and float function, and then the output that you get by default right? When you are multiplying integer by a float and then dividing it by another integer, by default the output is taken as float. This is called implicit typecasting, which is done by default by the Python. In case you want to change it, you can change it. You can call it integer, you can call it inside the integer function. So that is called explicit typecasting. You are explicitly telling Python that, hey, I do not want decimal, I want it as an integer. So this is your program. You can run it, you can try it. So now, right now on the screen you have a program which is a runnable program, and you have understood a lot of concepts through it. So I hope you are liking this series, and thank you so much for supporting me, and do remember to like, share and subscribe my channel. Thank you so much.